So in 2023, I tried planting a tree for every day of the year, and now that it's 2024, I'm going around checking on those section by section, and today we're going to be doing section 4, which is the smallest in terms of number of trees planted. It's not that small physically, it's just a field that is very, very sandy and a little bit out of the way. It's quite hard to get water here, so I hadn't really planted much here before. There's a line of my grandmother's old mango trees along that side, and off on the sort of horizon you can see another line. Everything else is self-seeded from this very unwelcome lantana, which is on my to-do list to cut out, to a nice albizia there, a lot of Ipé trees, which are a good timber one from the Americas, and a fair few guavas and various other native trees in amongst here. But our first planted tree this year is down here. We've got somewhere in here a little Pachelbelglabber. So this is the Saber Nut. It's one I like a lot because it's very hardy. This one did actually lose its tip, I think, to a bird, probably by the sort of height of the damage. But then you can see down here there's little green spots of leaves pushing out of the stem. These are very hardy trees. They are very, very resilient. I've lost one out of the, I think, 50 that I planted last year. Just a short way away from that, which should be one of the taller trees going in, not the tallest, I don't think, possibly. We've got this little guy. So this is Araria columnaris. So this is the cook pine. So this is from New Caledonia. New Caledonia is close to the equator, and this does have a little quirk that it tends to lean towards the equator. At higher latitudes that can be an issue, but we're only 15 degrees away here, and the ones I've seen that are mature, the lean is evident, but it's not problematic. You can see some nice pale growth here, not as much as on one we'll see later, but not bad at all. And then a bit further on, under some volunteers of the Ipé. So this is the Ipé. It's one of the hardest timbers when it's mature. This isn't the best one for timber. You can see it tends to grow a little bit wonky, but it's relatively aggressive as an invader, but quite light shaded. So I'm not too concerned about them, and they should make decent poles if I coppice them. But yeah, beyond them, we've got another non-native. So this is Bauhinia Variegata. So we do have some native Bauhinias in Zambia, but this is not one of them. This is from Singapore and Southeast Asia generally. It's a lovely one. It can be invasive in wetter parts of Zambia. It tends to only sort of spread in garden around Lusaka, whereas up in the copper belt it goes fully feral. But it's a lovely one for the birds. It's got fantastic flowers. It's again not too dense a shade, so a lot of other things can come up under it. So it can be a sort of scaffold tree to sort of start a woodland area. And then back out through the Ipé, do a slightly different. The cars be quiet. So back through the Ipé, we've got this little Java Plum. So this is a Zygium. This will be a denser shade. It will hopefully enjoy the shade of our little cook pine over there. So this one it's going to be a relatively dense tree. It's a fruiting one. It's native to Southeast Asia. I'm not sure if there's any native. There's at least one native gone into this field. But yeah, it's a good fruit. It's about the size of a plum. It's a little bit more astringent, but good for cooking with, good for desserts and so forth. And it's coming up nicely, despite being a little sun sensitive sometimes. You can see there's a little bit of burn on some of the lower leaves, but plenty of growth since the rains hit. And its ground cover here, this formerly Bryophyllum, so this is Calico pinnata, is doing quite nicely too. And then what will be the biggest, if not necessarily the tallest tree in this section, down in here, and actually really shooting up. So this is a new stem since the rains arrived. This is hopefully one of the Dendrocalamus bamboos. It was sold to a friend as a giant bamboo, and it'll be a while. It is from seed, so I know it's not the common bamboo. It's also got this green stem, but there's a fair few bamboos around that might be described as giant, including a solid-stemmed native one, which is not giant by any stretch, but is bigger than a lot of the garden bamboos. But we'll see it's coming up nicely. I'm really pleased to see that. It has got things like this euphorbia here, which will be a nice little toxic barrier against anything invading it, and this little Mexican sunflower, which is a very aggressive invader, which I do not like. But yeah, it's coming up alright. It should be not needing the Dracaena here as a marker for much longer at this rate. It's really shot up. And then over here we have another cook pine. Now I think I mentioned they can produce an edible nut. This one has come up much better. Basically everything above this brown point here is new growth for this season. So so it's really good to see. Still quite soft and tender. A beautiful little tree, and it's quite a way away. And that, unlike most native trees, I think these are wind pollinated. I think conifers generally are wind pollinated. I'm hoping we'll have male and female here, so we should be able to get a harvestable product, but that will be when I'm significantly older, because they are not fast growing trees and they don't start bearing when they're young. And just over here, something that won't bear fruit at all probably here, but will bear an edible flower. So this is Yucca gigantea. I planted a few of these out, especially in areas like this where the soil is very unstable. They're quite a good one to go in. They are always at risk from mole rats, but this is still nice and firm. And we've got one of the variety prickly pears here. So this is a cultivar of Opuntia ficus indica, but it's not one I've grown before. This was from a friend's plant. It should have quite a palatable fruit. It's one of the sort of commercial cultivars as opposed to the wild type we usually grow. And that's coming up as well, so that's good. And then we've got another yucca. Sorry, there's a little bit of back and forth. We have to go past this lovely little violet tree. So this is not an edible tree by any stretch. You can see here, this is why I tend to call it a sycamore violet. There's a fair few trees can be called violet trees. This is a seed very like a sycamore seed. But it's quite toxic. It's very useful medicinally, as are a lot of toxic trees. I personally would not experiment with it myself and leave that just to the professionals, because it is a dangerous level of toxicity if it's used wrong. But it's a beautiful tree, fantastic flowers with a fantastic sort of Parma violet smell when they come out, and they have been popping up quite a lot around lately, so that's good. But anyway, over here, sort of as far as we can get without ending up in section 5 over there, we've got another yucca who lost its top before I planted it out, but then it had little nubs here which have now turned into nice little extra heads, so that's good to see. And we've got a little aloe which I don't have much of coming down here, so it's really nice to see this has got suckers on. I'm not entirely sure which aloe this is. I've had it for a while, propagated a bit, but never had it flower. But it's good to see that it's doing okay out here, because it had been really struggling where I had it originally. Anyway, heading back again past the violet tree, past some more of these Ipé that are coming up, and past this Sandolive. Sandolive is also called wild hops. It's a lovely tree, but it does tend to get very brittle, which is why quite a few of them have this tendency to, as they get taller, just drop branches like this. The branch is still alive. Cut it back a bit so I can actually get past it, but you can see it is still branching up from this. That should be quite an interesting effect once that has healed a bit better over there. But yeah, they're lovely trees, but they're not going to be big, and they're not really going to dominate this once the other trees go up past them. They don't compete. But here, yeah, you can see the marker plant that went into this is toast. But we've got a nice little pencil tree. So this is another one like the yucca. It's a good one for stabilizing soils. Like the Sandolive is also true for that. It will stick around in fairly shady situations. They are a very shade tolerant little one, but it's also one you don't want too dense. Unlike the yucca, it can really affect the soil, and there's nothing edible from this. It's another medicinal plant. It's been in cultivation for a very long time for its medicinal values, but it's not food at all. But this, you can see this tender green stem is new. These little bits are new as well since it went in, so it will come up. It'll get quite fast once it's settled in. For now it's coming up slowly though. Anyway, from there we go in under this big albizia. So this is a poison pod albizia. They're a really fantastic tree, except if you have a lot of livestock. It usually won't kill livestock, but the pods which fall off them are very similar to a lot of other acacias and albizias, and those pods are edible for livestock, and these are toxic to them. So it's one of those things, if you're going to have them around livestock, keep the livestock away when these are podding up. But this hasn't got to the age where it does that yet. Probably soon. I'm going to see if I can keep it from doing that too often by pruning, because we will eventually hopefully get some goats in here, keep the grass down. Also got under here, before we go to our actual tree, a lovely governor's plum, which I mentioned a fair bit. You can see it's coming into fruit here. This one usually bears relatively large fruit, so this should have still quite a way to go. It's a very nice little tree, but if we get in a little further, you can see it also has some not very nice defenses going on. So they don't tend to get thorny once they're larger. You can see higher up the thorns are a lot smaller, but when they are small and when they are low, they get covered in really wicked, very solid thorns, which can do a lot of damage, so I shouldn't be walking around it barefoot, but I am not sensible. But yeah, but not far from that, and enjoying the shade of the albizia and our lovely little Sandolive there, some more Ipé and another violet tree. We've got Kagelia Afano. So this is a fairly large native tree, so this is the sausage tree. It produces a non-edible but very useful topical medicine fruit. So we do have one that is old enough to actually bear fruit, and did for the first time this year. I put in a whole bunch of this shell ginger around this. Some of it got dug up probably by the pouched rats. We might have a porcupine around it, we're lucky, but I haven't seen any spines. Some of it has finally started putting out some new leaves. Sometimes it keeps its stems when you transplant it, but usually when it's out somewhere quite dry, and here is very well drained, it's just sand, it doesn't do so well. But yeah, that will be adding a lot of mass to the soil, should be making it hold moisture a lot better in the coming years, if it can stick around, which usually it can. It's not native, but it is very resistant. And we got one of the native calincos here, which had looked like it had died, but is now coming up nicely. So this is the Sexangularis calico. But yeah, this is good growth. So this is where it was before the rains hit. So this is since the rains. It didn't go bald, which a couple of the ones I planted did this year, so I'm quite pleased with that. Through here, we have a nice little opening, but before we get into that, we have a tree that is so far concerning me. So this is not a cook pine, this is the Norfolk pine, which is much more widely planted. This is Araria Heris, and it is a little less tropical in its origins. It tends to have a more conspicuously layered trunk. We have got a couple already, and I was hoping if I add one then we might get female as well, so we start getting nuts, because this is another one. It does bear an edible nut, it's just you need both and they need to be old. But it hasn't done any growing yet. It's got some little bits of dieback since the rains arrived, which do have me a little concerned, but it seems generally healthy, just kind of static. It would be nice to see some progress somewhere though. The turmeric I planted under there, this little canna lily looking stuff, is coming up nicely, as is the Nepalis, which is one of the spineless prickly pears. And then through here, a bit that was sort of added to this section just because we didn't have much here, and the next section has quite a few. We've got a sort of triangle arrangement. The mole rats have been in here, so they may have done some damage. You can see the little evidence they leave behind there. And this is a Forra. So this isn't one of the trees, this is just here as a sort of grass suppressor in the long run. They will be arborescent, but they will flower and die. And unlike agaves, they don't then sucker, usually. Sometimes when the mole rats eat the roots away, they do sucker up. But these still seem to be rooted. There's 3 of those, which are around this little guy. So this guy was very inconspicuous, which is why I wanted such conspicuous markers. This is a ghost tree or star chestnut. So this is Kagelia quinquelobata. The quinquelobata has 5 lobes. You can see the 5 lobes on these massive leaves. And this is not usually a particularly fast-growing tree. And this bark had gone white in the dry season, but it's coloured up again now. It will be pure white. Once this is mature, the bark, when it's dry and inactive, just goes white. That's really, you can see a little bit under there of that colouring. But this is actually where it was when the rains hit. You can see it's tripled, I think. Yeah, tripled in height since then, and it's still growing up nicely. So it's actually outgrowing balsa, which is supposed to be a very fast growing tree, and this is not. But yeah, hopefully it will be very conspicuous pretty soon, even when it's leafless. Now around that, once we get past this little phantom flutterer, which is one of these lovely little dragonflies, we've got 3 of these little Saber Nuts. So I had thought there was only one in the section, but there's actually 4. So there's one here. It hasn't grown yet this season, but it's alive and well rooted. And then if we go to the next one, which is over here, it's still alive and well rooted. And I'm suspecting, just because, yeah, I can see its leaf already, just around here by the Dracaena, we've got a 3rd one, which is actually a little bit busier. Some of this is since it warmed up, but I don't think any of this is since the rains arrived. But it's looking quite leafy, so that is good to see. And I think that should be everything for section 4. I'm probably going to film section 5 right now, but I'll put that up in a separate video because it will take a lot longer to edit if I do them both together, and it might crash my computer. But yeah, I'm quite happy with how this is going. I quite like this area generally. Most of these things are here because they're relatively drought tolerant, or should be once they're fully established. And I'm hoping I can create a little bit more of a canopy and then put some more sensitive things in a couple of years when this is closed off a little bit from the rather unmerciful sun. But yeah, there's a lot of native things that popped up here, and that does make it a lot easier to plant things in here, and hopefully that'll start stabilizing the soil a little bit more soon, because just sand is really hard to convince things to stay alive through the dry season.